let's start. It's now time for a presentation on BAE Systems. It's a leader in the global defense, aerospace and security sector. And today we are privileged to have with us Martin Cooper, the Group Investor Relations Director. And he will present BAE Systems for us. And following this, we will have a short Q&A session. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, this is in English. My Swedish is non-existent. And I'm just the warm-up act. We've got delighted to have Lena here, who runs our Swedish operations as well here. So she'll follow on from me to give you some real detail around what we do here in country. But yes, so delighted to be here. We had our results yesterday, so busy program, but that was all good. So I'm going to give a little overview on just BAE Systems as a whole, and then I'll hand over to Lena. So just a few facts about us as a company. I think some of you may know we just completed on our biggest ever acquisition 4 or 5 days ago now of Ball Aerospace, a big space company in the US. So I think when we consolidate in their sales and their guide, then BAE is going to pan out at sort of 4th or 5th biggest defense, aerospace and defense company in the world. So that's a little bit about a backlog. I'll get on to our financials, but we've got about a 70 billion backlog, which is a record, employ 100,000 people around the world in 40 countries, and we're operating out of 5 main operating groups around the world. And I think there's a slide I'll come on to, but I think we'd be comfortable, even with lawyers in the room, to say that we're the most geographically diverse defence company in the world, and we see this as a real strength of ours going forward. So how we split into our 5 sectors, and this is obviously by domain. Our biggest sector at the moment is the air domain. We have preeminent positions on the 2, what we would definitely call the leading aircraft in the world. So we have a leading share in the Typhoon, Eurofighter Typhoon aircraft, and we build 15% of every F-35 aircraft out there in the world. And we're obviously at the moment starting the design and development of the next generation aircraft, which goes by the name of Tempest or Global Combat Air, and that's being built between the UK, Japan and Italy at the moment as the initial consolidating group, and that will be the first 6th generation fighter that will come into service. We're targeting a flying demonstrator by 2027, a Farnborough Air Show, and in service by 2035. So we basically have work going on 3 major aircraft programs at the moment, along with the sustainment support work that goes alongside that. We have an electronic systems business, which is centered in the US and very heavily US dominated. We do the electronic systems and warfare suites on, get this right, 80% of the US fixed-winged aircraft, with F-35 being the most prominent one, where we do all the electronic warfare on that, and 90% of the US rotary-winged, so we're on everything from Apache, Black Hawk, Chinook, all the way through, so a very leading global position on electronic systems. In maritime, very heavily dominated by our UK operations there, where we are the sovereign provider of submarine building complex warships to the UK. We're starting to build out programs similarly in Australia as well, so leading positions there. Then in platforms and services, which is where Lena's business sits, we do quite a range of things. It's headquartered out of the US, and there we have US combat vehicles. We do 4 out of the 5 vehicles in a US heavy brigade. We have a ship repair business, munitions facilities in the US, and we obviously have our Swedish operations here, which I said Lena will cover. So big sector and well exposed there to what is clearly an area that's receiving a lot of attention at the moment. And then we also have a relatively small cyber and intelligence business that's again headquartered in 2 areas. One in the US, where we work for a lot of 3-letter agencies, doing cyber and intelligence work there. It's largely security cleared analysts who work alongside the 3-letter agencies in the US. And then in the UK, we are the leading provider of cyber security to the UK Secret Services and allied nations. And that is a lot more what you would all recognise as pure play cyber, what I call the James Bond clever stuff. So that's how we're set up. I think clearly our new space acquisition will sit within the electronic systems division. So when I get to update this slide, now we've acquired them, then we will add space as an extra domain to that platform. The space business we've acquired is around $2 billion a year, so it's a sizable business and covers all areas from the low Earth satellites to the medium to the big Airbus satellites that are up in higher orbit. And for those who are interested, they do a lot of all the mirror work on the James Webb Telescope and things like that. So some really exciting technology. I want to do an investor trip to Colorado to look at that. So we'll see. So as I said, we're a highly diverse global operations. This is our sales as at the end of 2023 and where we're spread. Still the biggest spread of work is in the US, and the capabilities that we do there out of the UK. Our second biggest market still at the moment because of our sovereign capabilities that we have there on ship build, submarine build and aircraft build and cyber, and we're the sole provider of munitions to the UK government as well. So pretty much the UK's premier, well, we are the premier defence company in the UK. In Europe, we have a very wide-ranging exposure. I think if you add in the UK to that, we're clearly Europe's biggest by sales volume of defence company, and we obviously have our Swedish businesses listed there at the top, the shareholding in Eurofighter, our shareholding in MBDA, which is a missile, largely an air, land and sea missile producer here in Europe. The second but bottom point's important from an investor perspective. The US sells an awful lot of equipment into Europe and around the world. And US FMS stands for Foreign Military Sales, for those of you who don't know. The content that we have from our operations in here that goes on into sales in Europe is very significant and I think sometimes overlooked. So, for instance, as I've mentioned, we have like the electronic warfare suite on a Chinook. So if a Chinook helicopter is sold anywhere in Europe, Bae Systems doesn't get the headlines, but we get quite a lot of work content. Every F-35 that is sold into Europe, we get 15% work share of that. So there's a lot of content that we get through US foreign military sales that also boosts our European sales. We have a lot of long-standing government-to-government work in the Middle East. And I do stress it is government-to-government, so Bae Systems doesn't sell direct into the Middle East. It sells via government-to-government relationships. From a sort of a compliance and governance, and they are predominantly support work, with Saudi being the biggest one of that, where we do support to their air platforms in Saudi. Australia, moving to the sort of the Far East, is a very exciting area for us as a company and where global developments are moving. Australia, we've had a long-standing support and upgrade business across air, land, sea, cyber. As we look forward now, we're just starting to build out their Hunter-class anti-submarine warfare frigate program, which is a variant of the UK Type 26 anti-submarine warfare frigate. That's about to go into its, the first ship's about to start to be built on that of a 6-ship program. And I'm sure a lot of you are probably aware of the AUKUS agreement, which was a groundbreaking agreement between the US, Australia and the UK to firstly build a commonality of submarine across the 3 nations, but also to move into a lot more defence and security sharing. And the importance of that is that is the first time ever that the US has agreed to share technology between anyone but itself. And so we are living through some groundbreaking times, as you'll know full well in this country, around various alliances and changes in political stances for the first time in decades, now I say centuries. So some really interesting developments. So going forward, we will have, we expect to have a big submarines operation in Australia as well as the business there. So exciting growth area there. And then in Japan, at the moment, where we basically don't have any sales at all, very, very minimal. As I said, Japan's set to double its defence budget in 4 years. That will make it the 3rd biggest defence budget in the world. Pause for thought there, I think, and the Japanese were definitely going to progress with this. And I think we as a company are going to be exposed to the Japanese budget through the Global Combat Air Programme, which is their first sort of big own defence programme. Traditionally, they've built things. They've bought stuff primarily from the US and relied on the US for the defence and supply. They're looking to now build out their own defence industry and export, and we feel we can be at the centre of that, and the Global Combat Air is the start of that. So we feel we're very well positioned as we look forward on a global basis, and I think we see this as a key differentiator for BAE Systems going forward. So just moving to our results from yesterday, we delivered a very strong year of performance. Record order backlog of 70 billion, another year of record orders at 38 billion, so around 1.5 times book to bill. I think what the point we've been making for the last couple of years is that probably only about 5% of that would be related to the Ukraine conflict. I think a lot of people think record orders, ongoing conflict means it's all linked. It's not at all to do with that. The restock, the supply, the NATO announcements last summer about moving up in a multiple X of current capability into Eastern Europe, all that is still to come through in ours and other defence companies' order backlogs going forward. So good set of results, very strong free cash flow. A lot of that is obviously driven by orders. The more orders you get, the more cash you tend to get up front on those programs, and quite a lot of that was driven by the work that Lena's going to talk around, so exports of CV90 from here in Sweden to the likes of Czech and Slovakia, the BVS-10 programs. That all drew quite a lot of advanced cash, which was good for the business, good for the results. How am I doing on time? I'll speed up. So I think some of this we've covered, but look, we've announced and we think that 2023 was a year of really strong strategic progress. We signed the AUKUS agreement, we progressed the GCAP, three-nation alliance program, and we bought Ball Aerospace. So very good. I think I would stress at the moment, like a lot of other defence companies, you can't just turn on a tap or flick a switch and suddenly you build out lots and lots of capability immediately. This is going to take quite a lot of time to come through. So we do see a very long cycle of defence spending, and therefore the importance of this bottom line is really high. So we increased nearly 7,000 net employees last year, so that's about a 7% increase. And really importantly, we hired nearly 2,500 apprentices and graduates, and that's really crucial to us because they're the people who tend to stay with you the longest. And when these are really highly trained engineers, then these two big programs will be coming online in 5-10 years in a big way. And obviously we continue to build out our facilities and spend the necessary R&D to meet that. So these are all financials, and I'm sure you will all have access to the pack, but from a financial perspective, we're focused on top-line growth, margin expansion, and disciplined return to shareholders. I'm sure you hear that from a lot of people. But I mean, to put it into numbers, you can see what we've guided to for 2024. These numbers are slightly flattered by the fact that we've got Ball Aerospace in there, so acquisition revenues and profits in there. But on an underlying basis, our value proposition really to investors is that we should see mid to high single-digit organic growth, some modest margin expansion, and then BAE Systems has an ongoing buyback program and a dividend policy that yields around 2 to 3% at the moment. So as a total TSR proposition, we see that as a sort of a 10 to 15 TSR with very long visibility. This slide, 1 minute to go till Q&A. This slide is just a good example. When I talk about long-term visibility, I think sometimes investors go, as I said, you've got 2-3x of sales. What happens if there's a ceasefire? Does that mean defence spending goes down? What we tried to do and illustrate here is that actually the incumbent position that we have, or the pipeline, the orange block there, is basically where we have just long-standing programs that don't go into backlog at the moment. The backlog is what is funded, whilst the orange block is where you have a contract position, and we've laid out some examples there. So the Dreadnought submarine, for instance, in the UK is basically annually funded, same as F-35, while these are programs that will go on for years and years, and we're the incumbent. So as it says there, we feel we've got at least 10x of very, very clear visibility ahead of us, of sales and growth ahead of us. And on top of all that, then we feel we've got an awful lot of opportunities around the world. You're obviously all very well aware of all the global tensions and threat out there, and because of our diverse global portfolio and the range of products that we can offer, we feel we've got a lot of opportunities across the US, Europe, and in Asia Pacific across there. And Lena will talk about some of these, especially around the combat vehicles domain, as she does her piece. And so to wrap up, this is what we see as our value proposition going forward at BAE Systems. We do think we will be a strong beneficiary of a defence supercycle and are very well positioned. We've got an excellent backlog and opportunity pipeline. We continue to invest very heavily in technology and our people, and we have that global reach. And if we do all that, the financials on the right should deliver themselves. And we do have this very long-term visibility on our value compounding model. So with that, I will throw it open to some questions. Don't want to steal Lena's thunder.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Obviously, order intake is really strong for you as well. Can you elaborate on how demand varies across your different products or regions, and especially in Europe?
Yeah, sure. Very happy to. I mean, I think, in Europe, I think you will have all seen the statements coming out. As I said, the NATO force structure last year, which probably called for a 3 or 4x times where we've been. So that's seeing a lot of strong demand. A lot of the signals coming out of the Munich security agreement last week, I think it was again very positive around starting to see the flow of restocking coming through. And how you're seeing it is obviously things are being twofold. Some is being donated directly to the Ukraine and then being backfilled by domestic orders. And you see the domestic orders coming into defence companies like ours as that stuff is being backfilled. And then you see countries also building out their own defence forces. So there's a parallel thing going on here, is to replace what is being donated to Ukraine, but also building up your own domestic capability. And you are starting to see some very strong orders coming through across that for Europe, I think. And I've talked about Asia Pacific, where there's also a very strong demand. The US budget is domestically probably just going to grow modestly, but at 850 billion, it's a very large budget, and then it's therefore down to how you're exposed. And our US businesses grew 9%, 8%, and 9% last year, so I'd say that we're very well exposed to the right areas of the US budget. But yeah, very strong demand here in Europe, and I would reiterate, I think the whole restocking process is only at the start. I mean, I'd probably say the West is still net degrading its capability on a daily basis from what is being donated, from what is being purchased, and the commitments to go to a multiple of X beyond where we were before the conflict started. That is a significant and long-term restocking process.
Okay. And looking here at Sweden, we have also upgraded our defense budget significantly. And I'm curious if you have... excluding what you do in Bofors and Hägglunds, do you have other solutions within BAE that you think could fit the Swedish sort of situation and threat environment?
Yeah, I'm sure we've got lots of things that we could talk to the Swedish government.
Special?
I mean, look, I think we've tried to lay out there what our capabilities are. I think we have some, obviously, we have our content on there. I think some of the space applications are going to be very interesting coming out of Ball Aerospace. They're very US dominated, but they also do things in a lot of, I don't like to use civil because civil space has a bad connotation at the moment because it's not telecoms, but they do a lot of things in weather monitoring and other things. We have some leading cyber offerings as well that I think would be very interesting, and a number of leading maritime programs. But as we know in defence, a lot of these things are done bilateral government to government, and I think that would be down to how that is, but the majority of the work will be done through what Lena will talk about. So there's obviously some very strong relationships there within Europe and in the US around what can be offered in as either bilateral between countries or at a NATO level. So yes, we've got lots of solutions. We're here to help. So.
Good. Final question, and of course here in Sweden we are sort of focusing quite a lot on the air domain and what you have done together with Saab. Can you talk about how you collaborate with Saab in certain areas, and and also touch a bit on what you do in the Tempest program.
Yeah, I mean, Sweden and still remains a technology sort of partner alongside in Tempest, and I think that's very important. Clearly, as the world environment has changed in the last 2 or 3 years, then Sweden's obviously got to take its view around, obviously, the future of Gripen and involvement in other areas, and that's not for me to clearly comment on, but I think as regards as technology relationship, that is very strong, and I think there's a lot of sharing that will go on. If you stand back and look at Europe and NATO as a whole, you want platforms being able to work together, talk to each other, have the same supply chains, have the same efficiency in operations, and I think the alliances that are being built between UK, Sweden and Ukraine, all those sort of countries, that all works and all feeds into that. So you have a commonality of a number of platforms. And basically going forward, you'll hear a lot of talk about multi-domain operations and other things. This is about all the air, land, sea platforms being able to talk to each other in a cyber-secure manner. That's what it really means behind all the jargon that you hear. And therefore, the more technology sharing and involvement there is. So we continue to look to work with Saab where we can and closely. Used to be a shareholder. Not anymore, unfortunately. Exactly. But so I think that's an area that we will all keep a close watch. But if you look at between F-35 will become a dominant platform in Europe, and then there will be the next generation aircraft that will sit alongside that. It's not to replace F-35. That's a deep strike stealth aircraft, the multi-role, and I'm sure the technologies will be very, very similar on the European platforms, so they can all talk and work together, and that's the key.
Great. We're out of time, unfortunately, but thank you so much, Martin, for coming.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Thanks.